What if I told you that a carpenter from Nazareth 2,000 years ago mastered psychological techniques that modern therapists are just beginning to understand? Jesus didn't just preach. He revolutionized human communication using methods that would make today's psychology professors speechless. Today, we're diving into 3 mind-bending psychological strategies that Jesus used to transform hearts and minds in ways that science is only now catching up to. These aren't religious claims. These are documented psychological phenomena that will change how you see influence, persuasion, and human connection forever. Get ready to have your mind blown. Most people think Jesus just told nice stories to make moral points. But here's what nobody talks about. Jesus was actually employing one of the most sophisticated psychological techniques ever discovered, i.e., method so powerful that Harvard Business School now teaches it as narrative transportation theory. Think about this. When Jesus taught, he didn't lecture. He didn't give PowerPoint presentations. He told stories about farmers, merchants, and wedding guests. Stories that seemed simple on the surface but contained layers of psychological programming that would make a modern neuroscientist jealous. The mystery is this: how did an ancient carpenter understand that stories literally rewire the human brain? How did he know that when people hear narratives, their critical thinking shuts down and their emotional centers light up like a Christmas tree? This wasn't luck. This was strategic genius. Consider the parable of the Good Samaritan. On the surface, it's about helping others. But psychologically, Jesus was performing what scientists now call perspective-taking manipulation. He forced his audience to identify with a character they despised, a Samaritan, thereby breaking down their prejudicial neural pathways in real time. Modern psychology calls this empathy activation through narrative immersion. Jesus called it Tuesday. But here's where it gets really wild. Jesus didn't just use stories randomly. He crafted each parable to target specific psychological biases in his audience. The rich young ruler got a story about wealth. The Pharisees got stories about hypocrisy. The doubters got stories about faith. He was essentially running personalized psychological interventions 2,000 years before we had words for what he was doing. The most shocking part? Recent neuroscience research shows that when people hear stories, their brains actually mirror the neural activity of the storyteller. Jesus wasn't just teaching. He was literally synchronizing his audience's brainwaves with his own thoughts. This is psychological influence at a level that makes modern persuasion techniques look like child's play. So how did a first-century carpenter master what we're just beginning to understand about narrative psychology and neural mirroring? That's the mystery that's about to blow your mind. Here's the revelation that changes everything. Jesus understood that human beings are hardwired for story because stories bypass our logical defenses and speak directly to our emotional core. But he took this further than anyone had ever dared. Modern psychology has discovered that when we hear stories, our brains release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. Our mirror neurons fire, making us literally feel what the characters feel. Our prefrontal cortex, the part that analyzes and criticizes, goes quiet. We become completely vulnerable to suggestion. Jesus knew this, not because he studied neuroscience, but because he understood human nature at a level that was frankly supernatural. Take the parable of the prodigal son. On the surface, it's about forgiveness, but Jesus was actually performing what psychologists now call cognitive reframing through emotional anchoring. He took his audience's existing concept of justice, that bad people should be punished, and completely rewired it by making them feel the Father's joy at his Son's return. But here's where Jesus went beyond anything we see in modern psychology. He embedded multiple layers of meaning into single stories. The prodigal son isn't just about forgiveness. It's about identity, belonging, shame, celebration, and unconditional love. A single story activated multiple psychological healing mechanisms simultaneously. Recent research at Stanford shows that stories with multiple emotional layers create what scientists call cognitive scaffolding. They literally build new neural pathways in the listener's brain. Jesus was essentially rewiring people's minds with every parable. But the most mind-blowing part is this. Jesus used a technique that therapists now call therapeutic metaphor. Instead of telling people directly how to change, he embedded change instructions inside stories that felt non-threatening. When someone heard about the Good Samaritan, they weren't being lectured about prejudice. They were experiencing what it felt like to be helped by someone they'd been taught to hate. This is psychological programming at the deepest level. Modern cognitive behavioral therapy tries to achieve in months what Jesus accomplished in minutes through strategic storytelling. Dr. Jerome Bruner, one of the founders of cognitive psychology, discovered that facts are 22 times more likely to be remembered when embedded in story. Jesus wasn't just making his teachings memorable, he was making them impossible to forget. And here's the kicker. Jesus never explained his parables unless asked. He let the stories do their work subconsciously, allowing people to discover the deeper meanings themselves. This creates what psychologists call ownership bias. When we think we've discovered something ourselves, we believe it more deeply. Jesus was running the most sophisticated psychological influence operation in human history, and most people didn't even realize it was happening. Let me break this down simply. Jesus turned teaching into psychological hacking. Think of your brain like a castle with high walls and guards at every gate. When someone tries to change your mind directly, those guards jump into action. They analyze, criticize, and reject new ideas. This is why arguments rarely change anyone's mind. But stories are like Trojan horses. They look harmless, even entertaining. The guards let them through the gates without inspection. Once inside, the story unpacks its real cargo: new ideas, changed perspectives, transformed hearts. Jesus didn't storm the castle of human consciousness. He was invited in. Here's the beautiful analogy. Imagine your mind as a garden, but the soil is hard and packed down from years of conditioning. Direct teaching is like throwing seeds on concrete. They bounce off. But stories are like rain. They soften the soil gradually, naturally. Then, when the teaching seeds are planted, they find ground that's ready to receive them. Jesus understood that transformation doesn't happen through force. It happens through preparation. His parables weren't just lessons. They were psychological preparation for heart change. Modern therapists spend years learning to do what Jesus did instinctively: bypass mental defenses through narrative engagement. He didn't just tell people what to think. He helped them discover new ways of thinking by experiencing different perspectives through story. The most powerful part. Jesus made complex spiritual truths accessible to everyone. A child could understand the surface story, while a scholar could spend years unpacking the psychological and spiritual layers. This is what psychologists call scalable complexity, meaning that works on multiple levels simultaneously. This wasn't just good teaching. This was psychological genius wrapped in the clothing of simple stories. Jesus didn't break the rules of psychology. He wrote them before we even knew they existed. And if you think that's mind-blowing, wait until you hear about his second technique that completely revolutionized how we understand human expectations and belief formation. Character count, 2,497. This is exploding your head. Leave your like so more people can discover these hidden truths. But wait, because the second case is even more shocking. Case 2, the deepening section, 2.1, new mystery, 3,400 characters. While everyone was studying Jesus's parables, they missed something even more psychologically revolutionary: his systematic use of expectation reversal to reprogram human belief systems. Here's what nobody talks about. Jesus had a pattern of doing the exact opposite of what people expected, but not randomly, strategically. He was employing what modern psychology now calls cognitive dissonance activation to shatter people's limiting beliefs and create space for new realities. Think about this. When people expected him to condemn sinners, he invited them to dinner. When they expected him to praise the religious, he called them hypocrites. When they expected him to claim earthly power, he washed feet. This wasn't inconsistency. This was psychological warfare against fixed mindsets. The mystery goes deeper. Jesus consistently chose the most shocking approach possible, but always in service of expanding people's understanding of love, grace, and human potential. He was literally teaching people that their assumptions about reality were too small. Consider the woman caught in adultery. The crowd expected justice, stones flying, blood spilling, moral order restored. Instead, Jesus wrote something in the dirt that made the accusers drop their rocks and walk away. We don't know what he wrote, but psychologically we know what he did. He created a moment of self-reflection that transformed a mob into individual human beings confronting their own hypocrisy. Modern psychology calls this moral reframing through perspective shifting. Jesus called it Tuesday afternoon. But here's where it gets really wild. Jesus seemed to understand that human beings are trapped by their expectations. We create mental boxes about how life should work, how people should behave, how God should act. These boxes become prisons that limit our ability to experience wonder, growth, and transformation. So Jesus made a career out of shattering boxes. Recent neuroscience research shows that when our expectations are violated in a positive way, our brains release massive amounts of dopamine and norepinephrine, chemicals that enhance learning and memory formation. Jesus was essentially drugging people's brains with surprise to make his teachings unforgettable. Think about the feeding of the 5,000. People expected scarcity, not enough food for everyone. Jesus demonstrated abundance from almost nothing. This wasn't just a miracle. It was a complete reframing of how people thought about provision and possibility. The most shocking part? Jesus used expectation reversal so consistently that expecting the unexpected became part of following him. He was training people to live in a state of openness to possibilities beyond their current understanding. This is why his followers could later turn the world upside down. They'd been psychologically conditioned to expect that reality was bigger than their assumptions. Here's the revelation that will rewrite your understanding of influence. Jesus discovered that the fastest way to expand someone's world is to systematically violate their expectations in ways that reveal a bigger, more beautiful reality. Modern psychology has a term for this: beneficial cognitive disruption. When our expectations are positively violated, our brains literally reorganize to accommodate new possibilities. It's like upgrading our mental operating system in real time. Jesus was the master of beneficial cognitive disruption. He understood that people's greatest limitation wasn't their circumstances, it was their expectations about what was possible. Take the story of Zacchaeus, the tax collector. Everyone expected Jesus to avoid this corrupt little man. Instead, Jesus invited himself to dinner at Zacchaeus' house. In that moment, Jesus didn't just change Zacchaeus, he changed everyone watching. He demonstrated that no one is beyond redemption, that social categories are meaningless, that grace is bigger than guilt. But here's where Jesus went beyond anything modern psychology has achieved. He used expectation reversal to reveal character, not just change behavior. When he told the rich young ruler to sell everything, he wasn't just teaching about money. He was revealing the man's true priorities. When he praised the widow's small offering over the rich man's large gift, he was revealing what generosity actually means. Recent research at MIT shows that surprise activates the brain's attention networks more powerfully than any other stimulus. When people are surprised, They become hyper-attentive. Their memory encoding intensifies, and they're primed for learning. Jesus was essentially using surprise as a psychological spotlight, illuminating truths that would otherwise remain hidden. But the most genius part of Jesus' approach, he didn't just violate expectations randomly. He did it in ways that revealed the heart of God. Every surprise pointed toward the same truth, that divine love is bigger, wider, deeper, and more inclusive than human imagination can grasp. Consider his interaction with the Samaritan woman at the well. A Jewish man talking to a Samaritan woman? Shocking, asking her for water instead of condemning her lifestyle. Revolutionary, revealing her deepest secrets while showing her profound respect. Mind-bending. This single conversation violated social expectations, gender expectations, religious expectations, and moral expectations simultaneously. But every violation served the same purpose: to demonstrate that God's love transcends every human category and limitation. Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset shows that people perform better when they believe improvement is possible. Jesus was constantly demonstrating that transformation is always possible for tax collectors, prostitutes, religious hypocrites, even murderers. He was literally rewiring people's brains to expect miracles instead of accepting limitations. And here's the psychological kicker. When people started following Jesus, they began expecting the unexpected in their own lives. They developed what psychologists now call transformational optimism, the belief that positive change is not only possible, but probable. This is why Christianity spread so rapidly through the ancient world. Jesus hadn't just taught principles, he had psychologically conditioned people to live as if limitations were temporary and transformation was inevitable. Let me simplify this mind-bending concept. Jesus understood that expectations are invisible cages that keep people small. Think of your expectations like a GPS system in your mind. It tells you where you can go, what routes are possible, what destinations are realistic. But what if your GPS is programmed with outdated maps? You'll never discover new territories because you don't even know they exist. Jesus was like a master hacker who specialized in updating people's internal GPS systems. He didn't just teach them new destinations, he proved that the map of reality was much bigger than they'd been told. Here's a powerful analogy. Imagine you've lived your entire life in a small room, believing it was the whole world. Then, someone kicks down a wall and reveals that your room was just one tiny corner of a vast mansion. That's what Jesus did psychologically. He kept kicking down walls in people's minds, revealing bigger and bigger realities. The genius wasn't just in surprising people. It was in surprising them in ways that expanded their sense of what was possible. When Jesus healed on the Sabbath, he wasn't just breaking religious rules, he was demonstrating that love is bigger than law. When he ate with sinners, he wasn't just being rebellious, he was showing that grace is bigger than guilt. Each expectation violation was like a psychological key that unlocked a door to a larger room in the mansion of human possibility. Modern therapists use a technique called possibility therapy, helping clients imagine outcomes beyond their current expectations. Jesus was doing possibility therapy on an entire civilization, helping people reimagine what life could look like when divine love is the governing principle. The most beautiful part? Jesus' expectation violations always pointed upward. He didn't shatter people's assumptions to leave them confused. He destroyed their limitations to give them hope. Think about it this way. Most people live like they're playing checkers, simple moves, predictable patterns. Jesus showed up playing chess on a three-dimensional board that nobody knew existed. He wasn't just making better moves. He was revealing that the game itself was infinitely more complex and beautiful than anyone had imagined. This expectation-shattering approach created followers who didn't just believe in Jesus, They believed in impossible possibilities becoming, and subscribe now, because the third case that comes next will completely change your perspective on human nature. Now we arrive at the most sophisticated psychological technique in Jesus's arsenal, a method so advanced that modern psychiatrists are just beginning to understand its power. The strategic use of silence and questions to trigger internal transformation. Here's what will blow your mind. Jesus rarely gave direct answers. Instead, he asked questions that forced people to examine their own hearts, uncover their own assumptions, and discover their own need for change. This wasn't evasion. This was the deepest form of psychological surgery ever performed. Consider this pattern. When people asked Jesus direct questions, he almost always responded with questions of his own. Who do you say that I am? What do you want me to do for you? Why do you call me good? He was systematically refusing to do people's thinking for them. Modern psychology calls this Socratic dialogue or guided self-discovery. Jesus was performing psychiatric breakthroughs 2,000 years before we had words for what he was doing. But here's where it gets really mysterious. Jesus seemed to understand that the most powerful transformations happen when people convince themselves, not when they're convinced by others. He was creating internal conviction rather than external compliance. Think about his interaction with the rich young ruler. The man asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus could have given a theological lecture. Instead, he asked, "Why do you call me good?" Then he systematically exposed the man's real problem through questions and observations until the man walked away convicted by his own revelation. Jesus didn't reject the rich young ruler. He created space for the man to reject his own limitations. Recent neuroscience research shows that when people discover insights through their own thought processes, those insights create stronger neural pathways than information received passively. Jesus was literally helping people rewire their own brains by guiding them to their own conclusions. But the most mind-bending part is this. Jesus used silence as powerfully as he used words. When accused, he often remained silent. When questioned by authorities, he sometimes refused to answer. This wasn't passive aggression. This was sophisticated psychological pressure that forced others to confront their own motivations. Think about his trial before Pilate. His silence created such psychological tension that Pilate, the most powerful man in the region, became increasingly agitated while Jesus remained calm. The silence revealed who really had the power in that room. Modern therapists call this therapeutic silence, creating space for clients to process their own thoughts without external interference. Jesus was using silence as a scalpel, cutting through superficial conversations to reveal deeper truths. The mystery is this. How did Jesus know that questions and silence would be more transformative than answers and speeches? How did he understand that internal conviction is stronger than external persuasion? Here's the revelation that transforms everything we know about influence and transformation. Jesus understood that genuine change can only happen from the inside out. And the fastest way to trigger internal change is to create internal tension through questions that expose the gap between what people believe and how they live. This is what modern psychology calls cognitive dissonance therapy, creating productive psychological tension that motivates self-examination and growth. But Jesus took this to levels that make modern therapeutic techniques look elementary. When the woman at the well tried to engage in theological debate about worship locations, Jesus could have given a lecture. Instead, he said, "Go, call your husband." With one simple request, he bypassed all her intellectual defenses and went straight to the core issue, her relational brokenness and search for meaning through men. The genius? He didn't condemn her 5 failed marriages. He simply created a moment where she had to confront her own pattern. The question forced her to see herself clearly, and that self-awareness became the doorway to transformation. Recent research at Harvard shows that self-generated insights are processed in the brain's reward center, creating positive associations with new learning. When people discover truths about themselves through guided questioning, they actually experience pleasure from the discovery, making the change feel rewarding rather than threatening. Jesus was essentially making self-awareness addictive. But here's where Jesus went beyond anything we see in modern psychology. He combined questions with perfect timing and supernatural insight. He knew exactly when people were ready to confront deeper truths about themselves. Consider Peter's denial. After Peter's third betrayal, Jesus didn't lecture him about loyalty. Instead, he asked 3 questions. Do you love me? Each question gave Peter an opportunity to reaffirm his commitment, transforming his shame into renewed dedication through his own words. This is what psychologists now call redemptive self-dialogue, helping people rewrite their personal narratives through guided self-expression. Peter went from "I denied Jesus" to "I recommitted to Jesus" through his own declarations. But the most revolutionary aspect of Jesus's questioning technique? He asked questions that people couldn't answer with their current level of understanding, forcing them to grow into deeper wisdom. Who do you say that I am? Wasn't just asking for an opinion, it was asking people to grapple with the nature of divinity, authority, and their own spiritual understanding. The question created an internal journey toward truth. Dr. Michael Gazzaniga's research on split-brain patients reveals that human beings have an internal interpreter that constantly creates narratives to explain their experiences. Jesus's questions were directly engaging this interpreter, helping people create healthier, more empowering stories about themselves and their relationship with the divine. The most profound part? Jesus's questions often had no easy answers, forcing people to live with productive uncertainty rather than false certainty. He was teaching people to be comfortable with mystery while remaining open to revelation. When he asked, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul?" he wasn't looking for a verbal response. He was planting a question that would grow in people's minds for the rest of their lives, constantly challenging their priorities and values. Jesus understood that the right question at the right time can do more to transform a person than years of advice, lectures, or external pressure. Let me break down this psychological masterpiece. Jesus discovered that the most powerful force for change isn't external pressure, it's internal tension created by the right questions at the right time. Think of your mind like a locked treasure chest. Direct teaching is like someone trying to smash the lock with a hammer. It might work, but it usually just damages the chest. Questions are like having the right key. They open the lock smoothly, allowing the treasure inside to be revealed naturally. Jesus wasn't trying to break into people's minds. He was helping them find their own keys. Here's the perfect analogy. Imagine you're looking at yourself in a foggy mirror. Direct advice is like someone telling you what they see. It might be accurate, but you can't really see it for yourself. Questions are like a warm cloth that slowly clears the fog, allowing you to see your own reflection clearly. Jesus didn't tell people who they were or who they could become. He cleared the fog so they could see themselves through divine eyes. The genius of his approach was understanding that people don't really resist their own insights. They resist other people's insights imposed on them. When someone discovers a truth through their own thought process, they don't fight it, they embrace it. Think about a detective investigating a mystery. The detective doesn't start by announcing who the criminal is. Instead, they ask questions, gather evidence, and guide others through the process of discovery until everyone reaches the same conclusion naturally. Jesus was the ultimate detective, helping people solve the mystery of their own hearts. Modern therapy has finally caught up to what Jesus knew instinctively. Lasting change happens through guided self-discovery, not external manipulation. When therapists ask the right questions, clients have breakthrough moments where they suddenly understand themselves differently. Jesus was doing this constantly, creating breakthrough moments through strategic questioning. The most beautiful part? His questions weren't designed to make people feel bad about themselves. They were designed to help people discover who they really were underneath their fears, failures, and false identities. When he asked the paralyzed man, "Do you want to get well?" he wasn't being cruel. He was helping the man confront whether he truly wanted transformation or just temporary relief. The question revealed that healing requires courage, not just desire. Jesus understood that the right question can illuminate truth more powerfully than the most eloquent speech. He was teaching people to think differently by helping them think for themselves. These three psychological techniques, narrative transportation, expectation reversal, and guided self-discovery, reveal Jesus as the most sophisticated influencer in human history. He didn't just change minds, he transformed hearts by understanding human psychology at levels we're only beginning to comprehend. If these three cases exploded your mind, smash the like button and subscribe to not miss our next mysteries. And tell us in the comments, which of these revelations surprised you most? Hit the bell so the algorithm doesn't lie to you. And if you know someone who needs to see this, share it, because these truths need to be known. Next time, we're diving deeper into the mysteries of human transformation. Until then, keep questioning everything. This analysis is speculative and based on publicly available historical and biblical accounts, not clinical diagnosis. The psychological interpretations presented are for educational entertainment purposes.